Hello everybody, Sam here, engineer, MBA, and investor. And in today's video, I want to talk about CRISPR's current sentiment in the year 2025. Kind of got inspired by two different posts on X.com, and I told myself, why not make a video on it on this gloomy, kind of beautiful Sunday here in Toronto, wherever you are. It was really snowing hard last night, and hopefully it stopped now, but kind of snow is fun for a couple of days, but after 2 or 3 months you start getting anxious. You start wanting sunlight, and you start wanting to see the green again. And whoever lives in northern countries will understand what I just said very well. So those living in Florida or California or in Africa or South America or even Australia or even parts of Asia will not understand what I just said. But regardless, that is not the point of this video. The point of this video is about CRISPR's current sentiment. So there is a chart here that this person, John Arnold, posts on X.com, and he says, and I quote, "Not long ago, CRISPR was sold as a tool to cure all disease. Here is the current market sentiment via Stat News." And this is the chart right here, guys. Now my face is hiding 2025. It doesn't matter. You can tell where this chart is heading, and look at the percentage change in stock value since 2021. Look at this, guys. I mean, I'm not gonna start going through each of these lines, what they represent, but look at NTLA here, how deep it went up. That was in June 2021 when they first released their first data for NTLA 2001, and look how down it went, right? Look at it, look at Verve here, right? Look at Prime. Well, Prime came a little bit later, obviously, in the public markets, but look at Beam Therapeutics here, right? I would argue that since 2021, we've had just negative days over negative days over negative days, right? In the grand sum of things, and this has been an extremely tough market to be in. A lot of us got involved in late 2020, early 2021, and that's all we've been hearing. That's all we've seen. Red days, a red sea of flow, while other companies have gone up. Different sectors, not talking about the biotech space. Now, gene editing stocks, they're talking about CRISPR companies here. Sangamo here, I have barely covered Sangamo, but that is a Singapore company who actually published data, I remember, for preclinical sickle cell disease that I covered in 2021, I think it was. I don't remember when it was, but I kind of covered this company briefly, but every other company we've covered in this channel, including Editas, very well. And regardless here, look at this, guys. This is pretty big. This is pretty bad. Now, a couple of reasons you could kind of explain this. Was it maybe in 2020, 2021, there was a bubble? You could make that argument. You could also make the argument that the last administration didn't really help the space while they helped other spaces, other sectors. There could be also another argument that maybe, investors grew tired of the biotech space. And of course, we were coming out of the pandemic, and the pandemic obviously gave results such as these. You could kind of plot Moderna in it, which obviously is not a CRISPR company. And I guarantee you the chart would look very similar to Moderna as well, if not worse, I would argue, than any of these companies. So kind of coming out of the pandemic in 2021, early 2022, and obviously that sentiment from investors with the promise of biotech, the promise of healthcare, kind of faded away. You see companies like Teladoc tanking over 80 to 90% of their peak value in 2021. You see all these companies tanking value. But there's one thing I think a lot of us can't really argue against, is that since this chart began here, and you can start with 2021 January, that's fine, there has been amazing data from these companies, or at least most of these companies, excluding maybe Editas. I mean, data came in from NTLA, data came in from CRISPR Therapeutics, data came in from Beam, data came in from Prime with their preclinical, data even came in from Verve. I mean, Verve had a FDA hold in 2022, 2023, I believe. That got lifted. I mean, there's no reason to explain this chart just by data. And I think this is the big takeaway here for this video anyways, is as long as the data is there, as long as the science is good, then there's a promise there, and there's a story there, and there's a narrative. Whether or not the stock price reflects it, that's a whole different topic. I think people have to understand there are macro reasons here. Now we're focusing on CRISPR companies, but you could make the same exact chart type with every single company, or at least most companies in the biotech slash genomic space. Any company that ARK Invest was boasting about in 2020, 2021, any company that had a right lead up in 2020, 2021 during and after the pandemic, you could plot those companies in and you would see almost similar type of decline. Right? So it's not a CRISPR specific story. Now, obviously, CRISPR is getting a lot of attention because a lot of argument of people is, well, if these companies are so good, if this technology is here to stay, then what explains this chart? And hopefully I just explained that in the last few minutes here. Now, there's this episode from Stat, which again, that chart was coming from their media here. And Gene Investing with Anthony here on X posted a clip of that podcast episode. And I thought myself, why not play it? Because it kind of gives more detail to our audience here about the landscape here. And obviously this podcast is a lot longer than just 2 minutes. I speeded up here by 25%, but in the whole podcast, and I would highly advise people to go and listen to the podcast. And obviously they talk about the crisis in CRISPR, the status of CRISPR, what's happening. And this clip actually gives a lot of clarity about NTLA specifically, but I think you can draw that across the landscape. So let's play it and let's get back to our ending here.
So Jason, in your reporting, and you talked to a ton of people for this story, is there a company or maybe companies that sort of exemplify the issues here, sort of the disconnect between the science and the investment sort of business operational side, that kind of just are the sort of the true signposts for like how this, how CRISPR world has really come to find itself in this sort of down period?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two companies that prove illustrative examples. There's several, but one is like Intellia, which is a company that has pretty phenomenal success. Their gene editors have worked very well. They've been very strategic. They've really focused, and they've shown amazing data, just essentially halting a couple serious conditions that have relatively sizable markets. And the issue there is that those diseases have good treatments already. And so investors are left kind of guessing whether or not CRISPR will actually provide any benefit above those. And if it doesn't, if people will want this treatment that on one hand stops them from ever having to maybe think about their condition ever again, or at least think about it far less, versus the downside of this is unproven or far less proven. There's like DNA damage, all these speculative risks that are kind of hard to disprove. And so they've found themselves in a difficult spot where they've had lots of success, but the money is just going away and they're having to just cut people. And
Intellia is a good example, Jason, because I think, it's one of the original, I mean, we kind of think of them as sort of one of the OG CRISPR companies, right?
Totally. So they were started maybe almost a bit under 2 years after the first paper came out, and were actually kind of considered the underdog. They were a bit later than the two other companies, but they've actually been much better at executing, even if that hasn't always turned out in a way that investors will reward. And then another company, for example, would be Prime Medicine, which is a fascinating story in that there was a lot of companies that seemed to be started based off of some shiny new lab tool that maybe should be a company, maybe shouldn't be a company. How seriously are we thinking through whether or not this is actually worth pouring tens or hundreds of millions of dollars into? Prime wasn't like that. I mean, Prime is a genuinely huge advance. It's maybe the largest advance in gene editing since that first CRISPR paper.
And I tend to agree with that. Prime is, of course, a huge advancement in the CRISPR landscape. In fact, one person in our community sort of stated yesterday, I think it was, that they're all in Prime Medicine. They kind of gave up on every other CRISPR company except Prime Medicine. Now, Prime is not immune to any of that decline of the CRISPR landscape. They're part of it, maybe not as worse as some other CRISPR companies, but it's still a pretty hefty decline. And I love how this podcast episode kind of narrows to those two companies. For example, it is true that NTLA obviously went through and is going through a rough time. They had to cut some staff here and there. And it's kind of unfortunate because the data has been all showing positive, reliable, high durability, long-term data. is there, and there's a path there for a commercial launch by 2027. And unfortunately, this company is going through some tough times with the CRISPR landscape, specifically with the stock market and its stock price. And people have to understand that stock price does matter, not just for future investors, but also for current investors and also for their workforce. People have to understand that these public companies reward their employees, their good employees as well, rather, a hefty stock compensation, right? And it's kind of hard to attract talent when your stock price is going down or year over year. So same story for Prime, right? And I think this is an episode where the host here kind of illustrates what's happening in this space. There's kind of a disconnect between the public markets and what we're actually seeing on the field with these companies. Now, the crazy part of all this is two things. One, this is the longest bear market in the biotech space. It's been the longest since end of 2023, I believe. So we're rolling way 1+ year over the longest bear market in the biotech space. That's significant. People have to recognize that. In no time in human history we've had this of a long bear market in the biotech space specifically. Second point is how disconnected investors are with companies like NTLA, CRISPR Therapeutics, Prime, Beam. Kind of makes you wonder. I mean, is the stock market really looking at fundamentals? And one may make an argument that these companies don't have fundamentals, but that's the promise that you accepted before investing in these companies, right? I mean, everybody knew that these CRISPR companies wouldn't make a penny until much later in their phases. Everybody knew this. This was not a secret. It's not like you're releasing a product. You're like, okay, well, now we're releasing a product. This is how much we're going to be making, and that's it. In the biotech space, these things take time. You have to pour money, invest in them, believe in the future, whether that's 5, 8, 10 years. It's kind of crazy how data has been amazing, and everything has been pointing towards how CRISPR is going to be sticky, how the success of CRISPR Therapeutics and Vertex program with their collaboration with Hexacell is translating over a potential success with NTLA 2002 or even NextZ from NTLA or even Beam Therapeutics, right? Well, what they're doing with sickle cell disease with their base editors, or even what other CRISPR companies are doing like Caribou with the CAR T cells. So it's kind of insane how disconnected the markets are. But I guess that's what we got into. That's the long-term vision. People who watch these videos on a daily basis, weekly basis, know everything I have to say about what I view long-term about these CRISPR companies. I think long-term there's a multiple X's, not financial advice. I have a hard time believing in 5, 8, 10 years these companies are going to be worth exactly the same or less. I think that's a very, very pessimistic view, a very bare view of what could be in the future for these CRISPR companies, especially with all the reasons I just gave above. Longest bear market ever, the huge disconnect between the data in the field and actually the stock price itself. And of course, what's happening macro-wise with the new US administration, with what's happening, of course, with the stock market as a whole, right? With AI, right? We talked about this in yesterday's video with ARK Invest Big Ideas 2025 report about how AI is going to drive costs down and performance up by 1,000x for these CRISPR companies, right? All these reasons summed leads us to the following conclusion. The stock price of these companies has been beaten down unfairly. And I strongly believe, along with a lot of other people in this community, that we will have our day. Our time will come. It's all about being patient. It's all about doing your own research, building conviction, and looking out long term. And look, if you're not here for the long term, if you wanted to make $1 on your penny within a couple of business days, then I believe you're in the wrong sector. But I think if you're still watching this video, you're in for the long term. So Guys, I'll end this video like this. I've already went way past over what I was supposed to talk about in this video. So hopefully you guys appreciate this, the status of the CRISPR landscape, the current market sentiment, and of course playing the episode from Stat News. Amazing episode here. So thank you so much for watching, guys. As always, like our video, subscribe, like it, guys, and comment below what do you guys think. Thank you.